give me a tender, but I wasn't reliant on it because I could sell my products in the private sector. You and I would go in and with a prescription or without a prescription and buy a product, right? Vaccines has no private sector, at least in Africa. In Europe, there's a small one, but in Africa, vaccines are basically procured, as it was said earlier, by Gavi, which is basically donor-funded, by UNICEF, and by individual countries, okay? So one big difference is that when we make the vaccines, who is going to buy our vaccines? And that's where it comes back. I think the lady that talked about Gavi and the procurement model, that's a critical issue. Why should I, and I know, I mean, even my boss, Emmanuel, was banding a figure of 50 million. The minimum amount of, to get a good vaccine facility making 15 vaccines, legacy vaccines, the vaccines that we all use in our children, is going to cost us 90 million euros to construct. And then another 30 to operate. 30 million, because remember, vaccines, we will absolutely need a technical partner to give us the technology. So there has to be a tech transfer, and you have to pay them. Somebody mentioned, you know, nobody's going to give us intellectual property, you know, without getting something in return, which is completely fair. Long time ago, I worked for GSK. They are big into vaccines, as we know. Good colleague of mine in Belgium worked in their vaccine facility. They decided to give a technology transfer to a Brazilian company, Biogenesis. Believe it or not, it took them 7 years. 7 years to transfer technology from one company in Belgium to another company in Rio de Janeiro. And the Brazilian company was already making biologicals. So imagine if you're not making biologicals. You know, people ban these things around, tech transfer, but it is complex, it's difficult, it's not easy. And one fact which we should never forget, which I was surprised because I didn't know until I got into vaccines. If you look at the decade before COVID, right, the 10 years before COVID, the number of vaccine companies were declining. There were fewer and fewer companies globally making vaccines. So ask yourself the question, why? If the market is fantastic, everybody wants vaccines, why are they declining? It was because I think it comes back to how we're going to procure that. So that's what PAVAM has also done very smartly, the framework for action. It spent a lot of time on looking at what is the demand, right? Because if you don't have significant demand, why are you going to make an investment? So you will see in that document, they've looked at all the vaccines, what's the usage in Africa, how is it going to go forward with the population growth in each country. There's massive amounts of work done. And there you've got to thank McKinsey because they did a lot of running around, right? So it's a very good document. I would strongly suggest you guys have a look at it. Then you think, okay, so how many companies today are really active? First of all, I can tell you, don't quote me on it, I can tell you, not a single vaccine company in Africa is profitable, not a single one. BioVac in South Africa, Cape Town, I know the people very well who run it. It was a PPP with the government 15 years ago, maybe, even longer. Today, they are not. Okay? It's a tough market. So if you look at the most exciting vaccine companies are actually today all in Egypt. Egypt has got about 7 companies that are into vaccines. They've got tremendous commitment from the government. And I can tell you, where is a colleague from Zambia? Zambia? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I was at a meeting with Eva Pharma in Egypt. Apparently, through the Egyptian drug authority, they have made a deal with your drug authority that there's going to be mutual recognition. Is that true? Good. So, guys, the world is moving fast. So we are talking about AMA, and here is one drug authority. So it's like NDA going to Zimbabwe and saying, right, guys, let's agree that if a product is made in Uganda or Zimbabwe, each of us will accept it. Right? So things are moving. Things are moving. So Egypt has got good quality companies. They are already providing lots of vaccines globally, and they're growing, right? Then if you come, Morocco has got one. The King of Morocco is putting a lot of money into a company called MaBio. I think you guys might have heard of it. They've already got a fantastic facility. Then if you come south, of course, Senegal has got IPD, making a yellow fever vaccine, old-fashioned, but they are now expanding, lots of money going into it from donors because of COVID. Then you come further south, one real company in South Africa, BioVac. Vaccines. Got one big company, R&D hub. They will be doing a lot of R&D, and then they will be licensing their IP to African companies to make the vaccines. Another big outcome from PAVM, right? Very exciting for us, but it's not going to be easy. Okay, so that's basically what in Africa. There isn't much else. But what is much else is that every newspaper says, Uganda is going to have a $500 million vaccine facility. Kenya has got BioVax. They're going to produce a vaccine facility. It's tough. It's going to be tough. The other one which is definitely happening is the BioNTech one, the German BioNTech company that came up with the mRNA technology. They're building one in Kigali. They're doing it. I understand that they've given huge amounts of resources for Kigali's drug authority to vaccines. So just remember, it is doable, but it is going to be extremely complicated. Okay. So they've identified 22 diseases, which for Africa are critical to make sure that we have vaccines to support, okay, the security of our people. Those diseases are all the common ones that we know, but then they're also looking at some potential, we've got a malaria vaccine coming in, as you know. Hopefully it'll work better than the last malaria vaccine. And then they've got some diseases I can't even pronounce. All our focus in Africa has been basically on the last chain of the vaccine manufacturing. I don't think anybody makes the drug substance, the antigens and things like that. We all fill it. But that also from a commercial point of view is a very sensible approach. Right? Because even fill and finish is going to require 90 million euros to make one. Okay? So it's the right place to start, and then you backward integrate so that you are beginning to learn the process, get the technology, and eventually you will produce end-to-end. So the PAVM plan is to produce end-to-end, but they realize that you've got to start with fill and finish. Right? Now, the other thing I'm going to tell you, which is not yet published, but I know it's going to be published, there's a study done by PATH and by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They visited all the facilities in Africa that either claim to make vaccines or are making vaccines, right? They took some experts to go and evaluate what is the facility like, what is the capacity, is there a real facility, right? And their report is really a bit worrying, especially when our politicians read it, because basically what it's saying is that it's basically saying that for fill and finish, just fill and finish, you don't need extra facilities in Africa today to satisfy the demand. Because all the companies that are there producing vaccines are not working anywhere near full capacity. So their recommendation will be that our first priority should be to make sure that those companies who already have the expertise built over years and years will be given more volumes to make, okay? And then maybe we might need some more. That's going to be a shock to a lot of people, because everybody wants a vaccine facility. So I think that when the report is published, it's going to be a big shock. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of interesting discussions around that. So the whole Definitely need for tech transfer. Technology transfer, some to have tremendous trust, right? Because I'm giving my IP, you're both in trouble, right? So even preparation for that is quite challenging. And again, one of the work streams in the PAVM project was looking at how do we prepare how do we ease technology transfer? Because again, we are not that familiar with that in Africa. Unfortunately, people haven't come and given us technology. On the pharmaceutical side, we've got some examples, but normally it's been an Indian company kind of taking over one of our companies, right? They haven't come and said, oh, look, make this product for us and stuff like that. So that's going to be interesting. What else have I got here? Okay. Then comes a couple of really most urgent and important things. Obviously, our regulatory authorities, agencies have to move up. Recently, I think ML3, there were only from the Americans that has gone to PPB. PPB is now, I think they've recruited 20, 30 people? Yeah, 25 people. Poisons Board, they're the NDA of Kenya, right? I was at a very interesting meeting because that's history. Who else? Can anybody help me? Yeah, I didn't know that. So they've decided that one way to beat that is to reduce their reliance on India and China. But for a very positive way. They want to, okay, so they've decided that they want to make Kenya as one of the hubs for American companies to produce products and send them back to the States. That is an amazing achievement. Whoever in Kenya persuaded them, that's a fantastic start. I know maybe it's not Uganda, but it's a great start. So now we will have in the future African companies making products for the FDA. Brilliant achievement. So that was announced. I was at a meeting a few weeks ago, and it was announced there. So that's going to be good news, right? So tech transfer is going to be very, very difficult and not easy because no one's going to give it to us without getting something in return, right? So yes, so we need our regulatory authorities there. Huge amount of training will be needed, etc. And then I think comes the other question where I think as associations we can play a big role, and we've talked about it, I know, I'm just going to make it public. AMA. Does anybody really understand what AMA is? Who's not in? So this sort of, I think Solomon, you said it, right? It's a nice dream, like mutual recognition in Europe, you know? Yeah. So for instance, if you put one registration file you get for Africa, they're a million years away from that. It's not their mandate. It might turn into their mandate. And I think as associations, we want to push for that. Yeah. We basically, and also, you know, we should control our own quality. Africa should control. Why are we relying on FDA and WHO? We should control our quality. You know, we have smart brains. We can do it. But I think today, AMA is not supposed to do that. Yeah. I'm sure there's somebody who knows much more about it. Anybody want to comment on AMA? Please. Yeah. Ah, right. Exactly. I think if you can put that as a major action from this meeting, I think, because there's a lot of different understanding, not misunderstanding, but different understanding of what AMA is supposed to do. The one thing that everybody knows is that decision was taken, it'll be in Kigali, right? But what are they really going to do? I mean, we've had discussions, right, Emmanuel? So that's going to be, I think, something, but I think we should see it as an opportunity. It's a great way forward. Solomon.
No, I just wanted to add.
Yeah.
There was a conference on the African Medicines Agency, so I had an opportunity of attending that.
Ah, okay.
It was a side event.
Right.
What AMA seeks to do is they are looking at regional regulatory bodies, and once they have got all the four regional bodies, then they can be able to work with them to do the quality checks and analysis.
Okay.
And therefore form perhaps general quality control
Right.
system.
Yeah, that would be good for Africa, right? But I suspect it'll take a decade. Or am I a pessimist? Right. Gertrude.
Now that you made that end kind of important, just one line. I was once at a meeting held by NEPAD. It was a virtual meeting 3 months ago, where this issue of AMA, and I think it was a meeting how AMA is going to work and that. And then a line said, initially it's going to be chaired by WHO. Question time, yours truly. But I don't understand how the structure and the strategy of AMA can be driven by WHO.
Geneva.
AMA still retains what it was designed to do. But when that came up, it made me worry that how does it come up in a meeting? And it was a report that was going to be chaired by WHO, not asking us, should it be chaired by WHO? So there's still a lot of questions as to, like you say, what is AMA supposed to do?
Exactly, exactly. So I made about 4 or 5 points in terms of what it's going to take to make it sustainable on our continent, right? My first point is we've seen a tremendous amount of commitment from politicians. I think they need to go a step further and start collaborating, because honestly, we can't have 4 or 5 facilities in one region. It just isn't going to work. And eventually, who's going to give the money? I mean, like somebody said, I'm consulting for the African Development Bank. We've got $3 billion to spend on pharmaceuticals in Africa. 100 million this next 12 months. I've yet not, no, I wasn't, there's a deal I'm working with in Zambia, but there's no other deals. So, but have you got a bankable plan? That's the issue here. Money is there, but nobody's going to give you money unless the plan makes sense. And I think Emmanuel said it. The first question is, can you show me who's going to buy your vaccines? Have you got a deal? Has your government signed to say, we will buy X, Y, and Z? Yeah. Without that, it can't happen, right? So I'm getting frustrated. I can't spend the money that I've got. So okay. So really, it is. So I don't know what all of us can do, basically, to talk to our policymakers to say, look, please, sit together and come up with an agreed plan. Yes, we can have a facility in Rwanda, which is going to happen. Maybe Uganda will have one, and maybe Kenya will have one. But then which vaccines are going to be made where? Because vaccine volumes are not that big, right? A lot of vaccines you just take once in your life, okay? And we cannot have a facility sitting there in case we get a pandemic. We don't have the luxury. I've heard people talk about it like that. You think, come on, are you serious? Okay, the other critical thing, advanced market commitments. Unless we can get on the signatures to say, we will buy so much value over the next 5, 10. It doesn't have to be forever, obviously. But to get a facility going, that's got to be absolutely critical. And then the revision of procurement methods. At the moment, it's all Gavi. It's basically multinational driven. Gavi have just produced a white paper where they've also said that they're revising their strategy and that they're now considering when they buy from African companies, African vaccines, they're looking at paying a premium. It's the only way, because if you don't pay a premium, because our costs will never be below Indian costs, purely based on volumes. So if you want to buy African vaccines for Africa, then somebody somewhere, either the country or the donor, has to play a little bit more to make the facility sustainable. And then including African Development Bank, Afri-Exim Bank, they're all working together trying to find clever ways of giving funding, okay? I know Afri-Exim Bank gives out funds for doing feasibility studies, for instance, which can cost $150,000. So banks are with you, but they are also now beginning to get a better understanding of what it's going to take to get into pharmaceuticals and vaccines. Incentivize tech transfer, unless we can have some sort of incentives for a partner from India or South Korea, they're into vaccines in big ways, or somewhere in Europe, they're not going to give us, they're not going to give us technology. And even if they give us technology, just training the people is incredibly expensive on vaccines. Just the training. In fact, there are companies now that are setting up specific training on vaccines. In fact, Sanofi, who you all know, Sanofi now have I can't remember the exact name of that, but they've got a dedicated company that is just developing vaccine training programs. But it's not training like sitting on the front of a computer. It's training like going into a vaccine facility and spending time, and doing things, right? So that's going to be critically important. And finally, I think from an African perspective, we've got, and I think somebody mentioned it, maybe Solomon, it was you, we've got to start supporting R&D. I think, Gertrude, you mentioned it, right? We can't rely on ultimately getting the antigens, the bulk from abroad. We'll have to do that for many years, but we've got to start supporting, and we've got a lot of very smart, across Africa, very smart research and development centers. But they've got to be supported, right? Without support, it's not going to happen. So I think my only key message would be, let's get some reality with our policymakers and let them understand that they've got to work together across the countries and region. Otherwise, I think we will be sitting here in 10 years and saying, where is that Ugandan facility? And you can quote me in 10 years. Really. I'm not sure if I'm going to be alive. Anyway, thanks.
Another round of applause to. I just have Nazim.
Sorry, finish that. No, because it's critically important. One of the things that recently has happened, it was again, thank you Germans. I said really for investors who want to get into vaccines. Because I was part of it. But no, it is because it is really detailed. It uses, right, do we need 5 brand new factories? What we did was in East Africa. This model, it'll give as you ever know as an investor. If I put in, by the way, if I put in 89 million euros and my running costs are based on all, will I make money? So this 89 million in Kenya, return will be after 16 years, and the NPV is just positive. So that tells you, if you're a real investor, what I'm saying is that it is publicly available. If you it to you, it's a public model. It's a GIZ sponsored, so it doesn't belong to anybody, but it's a fantastic model. And a company called Onizima Universals from Belgium, they're a biologics company, real experts in vaccines. They actually developed the model, and I was consulting for them just to give them, for instance, they've even gone down to an organogram. How many people will you need in Kenya to run this facility? What will a CEO earn? What will because I gave them all that data, right? But it doesn't matter because you can use it for your country. So you don't, all that's there, including, but the only thing I just would caution you is that the model is developed for a CMO, sort of contract manufacturing organization. So you're basically getting bulk and you fill finish, which is the reality of it, right? So it's a fill finish plant, superb model. Please go and access it. It's there for everybody. Okay, sorry.
No, Nazim, do you want to stay with me here? I just have 2 questions from my side. So, what do you think about the law? I've seen a model work perfectly in South Africa when they sort of gave them exclusive access to the South African market, and as a result, they actually transfer the technology and train local staff to actually, complete the process. You've talked about all these fill and finish companies that are across the continent. Is that something that we can start with at least and, get the low-hanging fruits on technology transfer and luring the big farmers to come down?
No, I think that's a very good model, and you can study it. It's even on the website in BioVax. It has worked. It has worked. But then let me give you the other side, and that's why you will realize how important it is to work with the government. I think most of you are probably aware there was a recent South African tender for a vaccine, which BioVac could do, and the tender went to Serum Institute of India. Went to Serum Institute, SII got the tender. There was big outrage in South Africa. It went to the parliament, there was a lot of discussion, so they can't reverse it, but they've promised that they will not do that again, right? So, that's naughty. That is really naughty, right? So I think, but can I also say that we are talking vaccines for obvious and good reasons, but our biggest concern, at least my way of thinking, is oncology, is cancer. It's other immune diseases. All of those are going to need sort of things like monoclonal antibodies, biologicals. So let's look at that. I mean, honestly, if I was Bill Gates, I would not put a vaccine facility here. I would make oncology products. Because the technology is pretty much the same. It's the same technology. It's sterile production. It is, it's biologicals. But let's make monoclonal antibodies. It's insulin. Who makes insulin in Africa? There's a company in Egypt that's about to, but nobody in sub-Saharan Africa. And yet, I work for Novo Nordisk, the insulin company of the world. Just look at the price. Look how much money they're making. It's crazy.
Yes, I would focus on those ones, but also focus on getting Africa to be a bloc and negotiate on vaccines. Be strong and put our foot down as a bloc, because where will they sell them? We need to put our foot down as Africa. The politics needs to put on the side, and we negotiate for the vaccines that, for instance, the childhood diseases, the emerging diseases, so that we say, for us, we shall negotiate on this, looking at the price and the investment.
Um, okay, thank you very much, Robina. I'm just going to call in Karim just shortly. But Nazim, let me also engage you on the aspect of raw materials. 2001, the Americans stopped the supply of materials to India, and that caused some diplomatic row between the two countries. That made headlines. Maybe do some sort of specialization. Um, you know, for example, concentrating on country can concentrate on production of raw material, the other can concentrate, and that's its pillar. If we say Uganda is going to be a center of excellence for research and development, then we pump money. Uganda's sole responsibility is pumping money into be a country focusing on raw materials. So I want to speak about specialization and whether that's something that we could also concentrate on.
I think, in fact, active ingredient APIs, right, for us who run companies. That's one of our biggest problems. We don't make APIs in Africa, unfortunately, because again, it's a volume game. The margins are not big, but it's unless you make tons and tons of it, you have to buy it from India or China. But specifically for vaccine, I think most of us are aware there's a company in Mombasa. What is it called? They're making vials. Yeah, they make. Bill and Melinda Gates gave them $3 million to start making vials for vaccines. So we are already slowly. It's the right direction to go in, because there are. If you look at excipients and things, I mean, a typical vaccine has 90 different things that go into it. Now, the biological ones are going to be difficult for us, but there are lots of things that are non-biological, which we could make. Of course we could make. Of course we could. So I think that's a very good idea, but again, it's going to require collaboration, because you can't have a facility in Uganda doing the same as one in Kenya, because the market just isn't big enough. But for sure, and I would love to know how well that Mombasa, what's the company's name in Mombasa, making vials? Do you remember? No? Yeah, because I know because of COVID, they were going to do very well. I mean, classic example, I mean, gloves. Nobody was making gloves, masks, and suddenly now we've got companies everywhere. I think there were 60 companies in Ethiopia making gloves.
A round of, you have a question shortly, and then we can let Nazim say.
I was simply adding on the query he mentioned about the company making vials in Kenya. Maybe it hasn't started off, because one of the things we've experienced in some companies that start up, you've heard of the one doing capsules in Ethiopia. It is a good, when you look at their efficiency of production, capsules are always failing. So I think it takes it to perfection, and we can't procure from them. They can't remain in business if they are not producing the quality. That's one thing.
Yeah. A round of applause to Dr. Nazim, ladies and gentlemen. You're quite a resource that the continent has. Thank you very much. And if you're still around, would love to. I think the production team can help me and we shoot the hard questions with Nazim. My next episode, let's see if we can have that done. Dr. Nazim, another round of applause to Dr. Nazim. Wow, what a session it has been. Nazim, thank you very much. Appreciate you very much. Karim, come and take over your panel. And we're excited to hear from other panelists. Karibu. Okay. Okay. As we wait for Karim to come up, Nazima said that you have how much money? Africa Development Bank? Pharmaceutical sector. Wow, interesting. Okay.
Nazim, I just wanted to add that the Vatican has also put up $6 billion for promotion of pharmaceutical. Yes. I think it's in Africa. Emmanuel, is it in Africa? Yes. The 6 billion, is it for Africa or? I think it's for Africa, yes.
Jesus Christ.
Thank you. Nazim, just a question. In terms of the cost of that finance, what is the cost of that finance from the African Development Bank? That's the first question. And before you answer that one, I also wanted to ask a question, from an industry perspective. And we've got, but when it comes to vaccine manufacturing, you need the technology partner, you need government through the offtake agreements, and you need industry. In terms of those agreements, what is the structure of that? Because often the IP and the technology holder wants to have the dominant stake in the business, which is really not conducive to having African manufacturing for Africa, right? So just those two questions.
Good question. I mean, second one really, because ultimately the deal will be between one company and another company. Right? The government can facilitate, the regulatory authority can facilitate, but no one's going to interfere in the kind of deal that you make. So I think it's going to be a very, very, I mean, there isn't an answer to that. It's going to be very different. Not necessarily. It'll depend on what vaccine it is. Because if they're not selling much, doesn't matter, right? Well, sorry, what was the first question? Oh, the cost. Okay, so the African Development Bank, remember, first of all, it's a development bank, so they cannot compete with commercial banks, right? So if you're running a facility in Kampala, you might want to go to Diamond Trust Bank for your working capital. So they can only give you capex, not working capital, right? That currently, it's not very conducive to pharmaceuticals. Let me tell you why. Because currently, African Development Bank will give you a minimum of $10 million. But they can only give you $10 million if that is no more than 30% of your project cost. So in other words, your project cost has to be around $35 million before they are even interested, right? So I told them, guys, if you want pharma deals, it's not going to work. So they've told me they will now look at much lower levels. So there's flexibility. It's not written in the mandate, but they realize that if they're serious about giving money to pharma, they have to bring it down. So that's one. Secondly, obviously, normally the way they work is that they give you a small percentage above LIBOR, about the rate, that interbank borrowing rate, right? Now I know that LIBOR has gone out, they've got another term that replaces it. But basically, banks borrow from other banks, and they will lend you the money with a tiny, maybe 0.5% more than what they borrowed, which is okay. And then they will give you at least a 15-year loan, of which 3 to 4 years will be a honeymoon period, will be grace. So you don't have to pay back until 4 years from starting, which of course really helps. Because unfortunately, as we all know, in pharma, you don't make any money for 7, 8 years. You're just throwing money, right? You're building, nothing is coming back until you get your first approval. So that's, and then, it will be it depends completely on the type of project. In which country, some countries are more risky than others. And also they will not give you, generally they will not give you a loan in local currency. So it'll have to be euros, dollars, euros or dollars, basically. Yeah? But they are very serious, honestly, because there is right from the president of the bank, he's saying, why aren't we supporting pharma? So they are serious, but they'll need the right kind of deal.
Thank you very much. Question is, what is the opportunity cost of investing in that pharma when you look at the NPV and everything, and the return on investment after 8 years, then you get into the economics. But let's continue with the conversation. I'm in someone else's space. Karim, Karibu, welcome your panel, and thank you very much, everyone. I hope are we having fun? Yeah. Can we warm up a bit and breathe in? Stand up. Stand up. Let's breathe in and out.
Yeah, Solo, thank you. That
Karibu,
was my
over to
next
you.
thing. We've become very comfortable where we are. Can we stretch a bit? Say hi to your neighbor, stretch a bit. Do you feel better now? Are you good to go to the next session? All right. Sometimes we sit here, we speak about other people's health, and we forget ourselves in these meeting rooms. So it's important, being tired where you're seated, to stretch a bit and feel better. The conversation is getting sweeter and more technical. I sympathize with the people online on YouTube and Facebook because unlike us here, for them, they don't have an opportunity to question, to submit their questions. But we are happy in case someone submits a question on Facebook or any other platform, please, the teams in charge, please forward it so that the technical people here can respond to that. Let's not online. But nonetheless, I think we've really gone far deep into the conversation. And like I said, it is getting sweeter, a lot of learning, a lot of experience and perspectives here. So we want to get into one of our last panels for today's conversation. We've had since morning a lot of technical terms. At some point, I wanted to raise a hand to ask Dr. Nazim, what do you mean? But then finally he says it. So a lot of technical language here, and I hope everyone is on the same page with what is going on here. So we've had since morning conversations around the status on where we are in terms of vaccine manufacturing, local vaccine manufacturing. And by that we mean our targets as a continent. In the morning we had the privilege to hear from Dr. Janet from NEPAD, from Akona, the coordinator for Pharmaceutical Africa CDC, but also from the previous presenters and the panelists. We've had a lot of insights on where we are as Africa in terms of pharma and vaccine manufacturing. So we want to get to understand more in terms of where we are heading. And different institutions have different roles they play. And today our theme, like we said since morning, the discussion led by Dr. Kibira, is that we are looking at how do we enhance the role of the pharma associations in advancing vaccine manufacturing in Africa. And we believe that it is not just about the associations, but all the stakeholders in this room, all the institutions have a critical role they play in terms of supporting the associations, but also in contributing towards our targets for the 2040 race, as documented in one of our previous pieces where Solomon and team led us. So I want to invite a few colleagues. Some of them we've walked a journey with them. Others we are beginning to make ties along the way, because you'll find that each conversation brings a couple of knowledgeable and very important people in this conversation. Allow me invite Dr. Kwezi Sharifa from the Uganda Investment Authority to join us for our next panel conversation. I also want to invite Dr. Lule Ivan from the National Planning Authority. He has also been part of this journey, so he'll be sharing with us also insights in terms of what are the opportunities in the National Planning Authority. And then we want to also invite Dr. Yusuf Sembatia, one of the manufacturers here in the country. You're welcome to join the panel. And last but not least, I also want to invite Ms. Joanita Kambenda, also from the Uganda Investment Authority, to join us for this next panel. Okay, thank you. The other microphone. So I didn't want to stay the other side. I wanted to make sure I'm in the same boat, so that if you are sinking, we sink together, or if you are sailing, we close together. So we are very much pleased to have the team here before us. We believe they are very knowledgeable and they are very instrumental in terms of advancing the agenda we are discussing today. Just to note that Ms. Jonita Kambenda is representing the director at the Uganda Investment Authority, so we recognize the participation by the authority here. So we've been part of the conversations, even before being in this room today, but also since morning we've had a couple of insights. So we want to get a bit of a few perspectives from your different institutions and your different capacities. Where do you see us heading? And what are some of those opportunities we think we can ride on as we move this agenda? I want to begin with Dr. Yusuf Sembatia, and then we'll roll it this side.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, all people in the audience. I'm Yusuf Chimbo Sembatia. I'm a pharmacist by profession, but also the proprietor of a newly established pharmaceutical manufacturing facility, Kimsey Pharmaceutical Industries here. Now, a lot has been said in the morning session when I wasn't here. Found Nazim talking, who is our founder, chairman of the Uganda Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association. Now, when we talk about opportunities, what opportunities are there for vaccine manufacturing and so on, we need to come from why vaccine manufacturing, you know? But also, what's the context of other pharma therapeutic areas manufacturing? Are there opportunities? Yes. Is there a need? Yes. I would say all those questions are yeses. Because one, we as Africans, I mean, you would look at me, usually I go in airports, especially when I go to Asia, and they say, why are you walking with a stick? Because for them, maybe polio is something that many people in our generation, 40, 50 years, don't know at all. Is it eliminated in Africa? No. So, because those problems do exist, it means the need for that vaccine still exists. But in Western Europe and North America, these problems don't exist.
And big pharma or pharmaceuticals, if I can say, the investors in those companies need a dividend every year. So they are not going to invest into diseases that affect us Africans who are poor. Right? To you about that. The only thing that forces them to do that is on a couple of occasions, there is an HIV/AIDS conference somewhere, and activists go banging their boots and so on, and they're like, okay, as a corporate social responsibility action, let's do something. But really, there is nothing compelling for them to do it. Now, because these problems are still very prevalent, is there to do it. But it's we Africans who must do it, because these are our problems. They are not really problems of the Western world. Right? And you ask yourself, I don't have, but thinking and being a participant in this sector, you might ask, why was there so much speed in finding a COVID vaccine? COVID hit them. If somebody tells you 20,000 people died last 24 hours in Italy, 5,000 have passed away in the last 2 hours in the United Kingdom, I mean, every resource available must be brought to the table. All right? But you think about it. How many children are dying of very simple things? Diarrhea, malaria on the African continent. How many? So many. So from where I sit and not talking very big things, but maybe talking and being a bit realistic, I would say the opportunity does exist. The need is there. But what are we doing, we as Africans, in our ways to make this realized? I think that is the question in the room. Do we have the money? The need that really go into these vaccines? Maybe not, but maybe with the money we can have the inputs. So for me, I always say that, in most of my discussions here, is that, and like Nazim mentioned, many things. And if the policymakers can pick interest in this area, then it's possible. I'll give an example. And here I'm not being political, I'm just being rational and saying things that we all see. Run with Bion, and they're doing, do fill and finish, and their model is, they call it the Biontainer. They've got the normal shipping container, them, and it's what they're going to use to do this. Now, you clearly see that maybe the policymakers in that country purposed to say, we must do this. And so they've not gone to build a very huge factory with very complex technology, but just said, what is the minimum infrastructure that is needed for us to do this? And they've put it in place, and very soon things will come off the line in containers. All right? That is what policymakers have to do for us to make this happen on the African continent. Now, I also always say that whereas the opportunity does exist, we have some issues, we as individual countries, that probably are not going to make this happen. The biggest buyer of vaccines is an organization called Gavi. Okay. And like Nazim mentioned, not every country has to set up a manufacturing facility for Africa to be secure in terms of vaccine availability. But our something called the East African Medicine Registration Harmonization Program was started. I don't know whether there is anybody here from ESC. Okay. Now, the intention was that if there is class 1, class the African continent, we don't have a glass manufacturer need to pack the vaccine. Okay? The biggest vaccine manufacturer in the world is an Indian company. At the peak of their running out, but they stopped getting some inputs from their primary supply. So now, as we
Planning. That's planning that you write a